The client slammed down the contract across the mahogany table. Their face turned red. This proposal contradicts everything we discussed. How could your team miss this? My boss was already on his feet, gesturing toward me. Olivia, this is your fault. You weren't paying attention to client requirements. The room went silent. All eyes shifted to me. My stomach dropped. Every email in this project was mine. Every spreadsheet. Every revision. I had sent 3 drafts to him for approval, and he had sent back conflicting feedback each time. But none of that mattered now. He strutted out of the conference room, his jaw set with false confidence, leaving me standing alone with the client's glare burning into my skin. My face flushed hot. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one defended me. No one said a word. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. In that moment I made a silent vow. I would not react with anger. I would not cry. I would observe. I would remember. And I would find the truth. That evening the office was empty. I locked myself in my cubicle and opened every single email. My hands shook as I scrolled. There it was, the proof. His first email said, "Make the timeline aggressive." His second said, "Actually extend the timeline." His third said, "Why did you extend the timeline? The client wants it short." The contradictions were deliberate. I could feel it. I printed copies of everything. I took screenshots. I started a private folder on my personal computer, organizing everything by date, time, and recipients. The anger I felt was sharp and clean, but I didn't let it control me. I channeled it into focus. I noticed patterns, deliberate misdirection, instructions he never documented, approvals that came verbally but never in writing. He had orchestrated this failure perfectly, counting on my panic to make me take the fall. My pulse steadied. I realized something crucial. Patience and meticulous documentation would be my greatest allies. Then I found it. A hidden draft buried in the shared drive. He had intentionally altered the proposal after I submitted it, changing key dates and removing my notes. The alteration was time-stamped. It was him. It had always been him. I spent the next week cataloging everything. I created a timeline of responsibility that was impossible to argue with. Every email, every call, every instruction. My boss sent a passive-aggressive email to the whole team. "Let's ensure we're more careful with client communications moving forward." I read it calmly. Every word was a lie by omission. I crafted a hidden folder on my personal laptop, organized by date, time, and recipients. I refused to vent to colleagues. Instead, I watched them. I noticed how they avoided eye contact with me, how they whispered when I walked past. I realized this was bigger than a single failed deal. This was a test of my composure. Could I stay quiet while everyone thought I was incompetent? Could I be the only person who knew the truth? That evening I discovered something else. My boss had scheduled a team meeting for the next day. I knew exactly what he would do. He would misrepresent the failure again, paint himself as the victim of my mistakes, and cement the narrative in everyone's minds. And I would be forced to sit there and listen, unless I had a plan. He stood at the front of the conference room, commanding the space like he owned it. "I want to address the account collapse," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. The core issue was lack of attention to detail from certain team members. He looked directly at me. Colleagues shifted uncomfortably. He continued, "I guided this project flawlessly. I provided clear direction at every step. Unfortunately, some people couldn't execute." His smile was cold. It was a performance. I stayed seated, absolutely calm. I took mental notes of every misstatement. I identified exactly which lies were provable and which ones weren't. One colleague, Ryan, raised his hand quietly. "Just to clarify, what specific instruction was unclear?" My boss paused for a fraction of a second. Everything was crystal clear. "Some people just don't listen." He moved on quickly, but I caught it. That pause. That hesitation. It meant he knew the instructions couldn't hold up to scrutiny. After the meeting, one person approached me privately. This was the moment everything could change. "Olivia, I know what happened." It was Catherine from the operations team. She had worked on similar projects before. "He gave you contradictory instructions. I saw some of the emails. I know he's blaming you unfairly." I felt something shift inside my chest. I wasn't alone. I smiled faintly at her, and she understood immediately. We couldn't talk here. We went to a coffee shop after work. In a quiet corner booth, Catherine pulled out her phone. "I archived some emails," she said. "I thought something seemed off, so I started saving things." Together we reviewed them. Each discrepancy became another puzzle piece. She had documentation of him telling different team members to do different things on the same project. Her eyes widened as she read my timeline. "This is bad," she whispered. "He did this intentionally." My plan was forming now. Silent, untraceable, and methodical. Catherine hesitated before speaking. "There are internal meeting recordings. From the client calls. They're stored in the secure server. If we could listen to them, it would prove what he said versus what actually happened." She lowered her voice. "But retrieving them would be risky. HR monitors that kind of access." I accessed the archived recordings the next day using my standard employee credentials. My heart pounded as the audio files loaded. I put on headphones and listened. There it was. His voice, clear and unmistakable. In the first call he told the client, "We'll have the timeline compressed by next week." In the second call, 1 week later, he told the client, "We've extended the timeline as requested." The client sounded confused. "We never requested an extension. You suggested the compressed timeline." He fumbled. "I'm sure we discussed flexibility." "We didn't." I listened to every second. Each time-stamped instance reinforced my case. I kept meticulous notes, labeling every instance of his mismanagement with precision. His arrogance made him careless. He never thought anyone would review these recordings. He never imagined someone would be patient enough to document everything. Then I heard it, the moment that changed everything. In a call with another team member, he said clearly, "Don't tell the client about the error. I'll handle it separately." But he never told the client. He buried it. The error went unaddressed for 3 weeks. That was the smoking gun. An email landed in my inbox. It was from the client, confused about conflicting information in our project history. They asked why certain deadlines had changed without their approval. My boss forwarded it to me. "Olivia, please resolve this confusion and respond to the client." I read it calmly, my jaw tight. He was trying to make me fix his mess publicly. I saved a copy of the email to my evidence folder. But then I realized something. The client had unknowingly become a witness to his mismanagement. They were questioning the inconsistencies because the inconsistencies actually existed. They had written proof of his deception in their own words. I drafted a careful response, explaining the timeline of communications honestly. I CC'd my boss and also copied our department head, ensuring visibility while documenting that I had provided accurate information. The department head would see my response. The client would see the truth. And my boss would realize I wasn't going to take the fall quietly. When he read my response, he called me immediately. "Why did you copy the department head? That's not standard protocol." His voice was tight. I responded calmly. "I wanted to ensure transparency on a high-priority account. Is there an issue with the information I provided?" He hung up without answering. He cornered me in the hallway the next morning. "You need to fix this immediately," he barked. "The client is questioning everything. This is your mess." I smiled politely, acknowledging him without agreeing. "I've documented all communications. Everything is clear in the record." Internally, I catalogued every word he said, every micro-expression on his face. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. My calm, measured responses frustrated him. I could see it in his jaw. I realized something crucial. My greatest advantage was silence paired with evidence. Silence made him feel powerful until he realized I had proof. Then silence became terrifying. "Just make sure this doesn't happen again," he said finally, walking away. I watched him go, completely composed. That evening I received a calendar notification. He had scheduled a private meeting with HR for tomorrow. He was escalating. He was going to make it official. He was going to try to document my incompetence on the record. He thought he was cornering me. But he was actually walking into a trap he didn't even know existed. I sat across from the HR manager, Linda, in a small office. My boss sat beside me, arms crossed. "I wanted to document some performance concerns," he said. "Olivia has been careless with client communications. This latest account collapse is a direct result of her inattention." Linda looked at me. "Olivia, how do you respond?" I had prepared for this. I presented facts sparingly, answering truthfully without showing emotion. The account challenges stemmed from conflicting instructions provided across multiple communications. "I have documentation of the timeline if you'd like to review it." My boss interrupted. "That's not accurate." I provided clear, consistent direction. I stayed composed. "The email record shows otherwise. For example, on March 15th, you requested a compressed timeline. On March 22nd, you asked why the timeline had been extended. These are documented in email." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. She was listening. My boss grew defensive. I was testing her problem-solving skills. She should have clarified my intent. I let that sit in the silence. Made no sense. After the meeting, as we left, an HR assistant whispered to me in the hallway. I noticed inconsistencies in his version of events. I hope that helps. She was watching. She was on my side. Or at least, she was on the side of truth. Late that night, I compiled a comprehensive document. Not an accusation. Not an argument. Just facts. Every email, every call, every instruction, every altered document. All arranged chronologically with timestamps and recipients. Each piece fit together perfectly like a puzzle, revealing his manipulations in crystalline clarity. I read through it 3 times, checking for any weakness, any gap in the logic. There was none. My heart raced with quiet anticipation. I knew what this document could do. I knew what it would prove. I made 3 copies. One saved to my personal cloud, one printed and locked in a safe deposit box, one kept on my laptop. If he tried to make evidence disappear, I would have backups. As I organized the final documents, I realized one critical file was missing. File I had seen him access weeks ago. A file that should have been in the project folder but wasn't. Deleted file. The file that would explain everything. If I could restore it, it would be the linchpin. It would end this completely. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Catherine's warning, that accessing certain files could trigger HR alerts. But I also knew that if I didn't act now, the trail might go cold. The backup systems had a limited retention period. In a few weeks, the deleted file would be permanently gone. I would lose the smoking gun. I thought about the humiliation, the public blame, the colleagues who still looked at me with doubt. I thought about my boss walking out of that conference room confident in his victory. I had to be brave. I had to take the calculated risk. Tomorrow I would contact IT. I contacted IT the next morning. "I'm trying to recover a document from the shared drive. It may have been accidentally deleted." I gave them the file name and approximate date. The IT technician, who had always been helpful, said, "Let me check our backup systems." 2 hours later he called me back. "Found it. Interesting, it was deleted by your boss about 6 weeks ago, but our system automatically backs up every version." He restored it to the drive. My hands trembled as I opened the file. It was an internal memo from my boss to himself. Notes from his private conversations with the client. In those notes he had written, "Client prefers compressed timeline. I'll recommend extended timeline to test team capability. This will reveal who can handle pressure." He had deliberately created the contradictory instructions as a test. Then, when I failed the test, he blamed me for not understanding his intention. The file was explicit proof of his premeditation. I smiled silently, realizing this was the linchpin. This was the moment the entire structure of his lies would collapse. That evening he sent a message to the team, celebrating a win with the Martinez account today. Excellent leadership on my part ensured smooth execution. He was still lying. He was still performing. He had no idea what was coming. I printed the memo and placed it in my safe deposit box. Catherine called me that night. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm worried he's getting suspicious. He asked me about the recordings earlier. He wanted to know if I had accessed them." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I said I didn't know anything about recordings. But Olivia, we need to be careful. If he realizes what we're doing, he might try to destroy evidence or claim we fabricated it." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. She was right. The timeline was tightening. We had days, maybe hours, before he understood the full scope of what was happening. The office buzzed with talk of the failed account. My boss grew increasingly overconfident. I watched him in meetings, saw how he publicly patted himself on the back for heroic crisis management on other projects. He had rewritten the narrative so completely that some colleagues actually believed he was a victim of my incompetence. I maintained perfect composure. I listened. I watched reactions. I recorded observations in my evidence folder. I noticed something crucial. Colleagues were starting to whisper about inconsistencies. Not because I told them anything, but because the contradictions in his story were becoming obvious to anyone paying attention. Ryan had asked other team members about their experiences with contradictory instructions. Catherine had mentioned casually that she'd seen conflicting emails. The truth was spreading quietly, person by person. One afternoon, I overheard two junior employees discussing the project in the break room. "I don't understand how he can blame her when the emails clearly show he changed the timeline," one said. "I saw the same thing," the other replied. My heart lifted. The narrative was shifting without me saying a single word. The evidence was doing all the work. Then he made his move. He requested that I draft a post-mortem report on the failed account. "I want a thorough analysis," he said, "so we can all learn from this." He thought he was being clever. He thought I would either write a report that made him look bad, giving him ammunition to claim I was retaliating, or write one that protected him, cementing my guilt. But he didn't understand. I had already won. He just didn't know it yet. I drafted the post-mortem with meticulous care. Not aggressive, not accusatory, just methodical. Each section walked through the project timeline with precision. Initial project scope, compressed timeline per client preference, as documented in email dated March 15th. Then, subsequent instruction dated March 22nd, requested timeline extension, creating inconsistency in project direction. Highlighted dates. I referenced specific communications. I noted which decisions were documented in writing and which ones existed only in memory. To anyone reading it casually, it seemed like a straightforward project review. But to anyone reading it carefully, anyone familiar with the actual events, it exposed his manipulations completely. Every lie had a footnote. Every contradiction had a timestamp. I submitted it to him for review. He skimmed it, scanning for anything that directly blamed him by name. Finding none, he approved it without understanding what he was reading. He didn't grasp that the facts themselves were the accusation. He didn't realize that truth doesn't need to shout to be devastating. I shared the postmortem with leadership quietly, answering only factual questions when they asked. "Is this timeline accurate?" "Yes, it's sourced from our email records and call logs." "Are these dates correct?" "Yes, you can verify them in the shared drive." I smiled faintly as I watched leadership begin cross-referencing the document with actual emails and records. I saw their expressions shift. I saw them making connections. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. He sensed unease among executives. I could see it in how they started looking at him differently in meetings. His confidence began to fracture. He grew suspicious, but he couldn't pinpoint why. He didn't understand that his own words, arranged chronologically and factually, were creating doubt. He couldn't argue with timestamps. He couldn't dispute emails that existed in the permanent record. The post-mortem had done its work. He tried to shift blame to another team member, claiming they had misunderstood his instructions. But internal records, emails, meeting notes, recorded calls, contradicted him completely. The colleague he tried to blame came to me privately. "He's lying," they said quietly. "I have the emails he sent me. They don't match what he just said." I nodded, unsurprised. "Keep those emails," I advised. "You may need them." The colleague hesitated publicly during the next meeting when my boss made his accusation. They didn't defend themselves aggressively. They just said, "I have documentation that contradicts that account." The team sensed cracks in his narrative. You could feel the tension in the office. A shift, subtle but undeniable. Colleagues who had avoided me now made eye contact. People started asking me quiet questions about the actual project timeline. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Another department head, a woman named Jessica who had remained neutral throughout this entire situation, approached me privately. She had been reviewing the post-mortem and cross-checking facts. "The timeline doesn't add up," she said directly. "I need clarification on when he actually communicated these changes." Together we walked through the evidence. She listened carefully, taking notes. She wasn't interested in blame. She was interested in truth. When I showed her the deleted file, the one where he documented his own intention to create conflicting instructions, her expression hardened. "This is deliberate," she said. "This is not a miscommunication. This is intentional sabotage of a team member." She stood up. "I need to escalate this." I felt something shift inside me. For months I had been alone. Now, someone in a position of real authority understood exactly what had happened. "Thank you," I whispered. Jessica placed her hand on my shoulder. "You did everything right. You documented, you stayed calm, and you let the evidence speak. That took extraordinary strength." Her validation meant more than I expected. My boss noticed unusual alignment among colleagues suddenly. He saw Jessica talking to me. He saw leadership reviewing files. He started to panic internally. I could see it in how his voice tightened in meetings, in how his usual charm became strained. He was beginning to understand that something was closing in on him. He attempted to preemptively present corrected information to executives, trying to get ahead of the narrative. But my timeline and evidence silently undermined every word he said. The executives had already reviewed the postmortem. They had already cross-checked the facts. His corrections contradicted the documented record. He sounded confused and defensive. Leadership requested a formal review of all project communications. This was the moment he realized his position was collapsing. He would have to explain every decision, justify every instruction, defend every contradiction. He couldn't do it. Not because he wasn't intelligent, but because the truth was against him, and he had no legitimate defense. He confronted me in the empty hallway late one afternoon. "What have you been telling people?" His voice was sharp, almost desperate. I could see the panic in his eyes. "Nothing," I said truthfully. "I've simply documented the facts when asked. Everything I've said is in the record." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You're sabotaging me. You're trying to make me look bad." I remained absolutely calm, noting every micro-expression and word. My composure seemed to enrage him more. "I'm providing accurate information. If that contradicts other accounts, it's because those accounts aren't accurate," I said evenly. He had no response to that. His jaw clenched. He opened his mouth as if to threaten me, then stopped himself. He realized in that moment that he had no power over me anymore. Not because I was stronger physically, but because I held the truth, and the truth was unshakable. He demanded I attend a joint meeting with executives the following day. "We're going to resolve this," he said, his voice hollow now. I nodded calmly. He thought he was confronting me. He didn't realize he was walking directly into a meeting where my entire arsenal of evidence would be visible to the people who mattered most. This was the moment he had given me without understanding what he was doing. The next morning I sat in a conference room with my boss, 3 executives, and Jessica from the other department. I had barely slept. My evidence folder felt like it was burning in my bag. I kept thinking about how he would react when his lies collapsed in real time, in front of the people whose opinions actually mattered. My boss presented first. He was overconfident. His rehearsed story smooth and polished. The account collapsed due to inconsistent execution from junior team members. I provided leadership, but the team wasn't capable of meeting the client's needs. He sounded authoritative. He sounded believable, if you didn't know the facts. He even threw in a subtle jab at me. Some people simply aren't detail-oriented enough for client-facing work. The words stung, but I didn't react. I simply breathed and waited. Then an executive, someone named Leonard, interrupted. "One thing I'm confused about. In the post-mortem report, it references an email you sent on March 22nd requesting a timeline extension. But in your presentation just now, you said you recommended a compressed timeline throughout. Which is accurate?" My boss stammered. "I was testing the team's adaptability." Leonard nodded slowly, his expression skeptical. "So you intentionally sent conflicting instructions." The silence was deafening. My boss tried to recover, but he had already contradicted himself. The executives exchanged glances. I remained silent, letting his contradictions speak for themselves. Jessica leaned forward, writing something down. She was documenting his lie in real time. "Let me ask for clarification on specific timestamps," another executive said, looking at me. I calmly referenced the emails in the postmortem, providing exact dates and times. The executives had already reviewed this information, but hearing it aloud, watching my boss fail to defend himself, created a shift in the room. Colleagues on the call could see the contradiction clearly now. My silence amplified his errors. Every time he tried to explain something away, the documented facts contradicted him. He grew more agitated. His usual charm evaporated, replaced by defensive explanations that made him sound guilty. "I have the original email," I said quietly when he claimed something had been misunderstood. I showed the email. The date was clear. The instruction was clear. There was no ambiguity. There was only proof. I produced the critical materials, the deleted memo, the recordings, the full timeline with every email referenced. I walked the executives through it logically and calmly, letting the evidence speak. I didn't make accusations. I simply presented facts in chronological order. His arrogance, his lies, his deliberately contradictory instructions, all of it became crystal clear. He stammered, unable to maintain his narrative. Each time he tried to create an alternative explanation, another piece of evidence contradicted him. The recordings were particularly devastating. Hearing his own voice in his own words, giving contradictory instructions to different people, there was no defense for that. His face flushed. He tried one last time to redirect blame, but the timestamps and recordings cornered him completely. He had nowhere to go. His arrogance collapsed in real time. You could see it happen. The executives reviewed the evidence methodically, their expressions growing harder. Colleagues on the video call nodded subtly, finally seeing the truth. One of them actually said, "I always thought something was off with those instructions." I watched my boss's face transform from confidence to confusion to pure fear. It was like watching someone realize they had been walking toward a cliff and suddenly seeing the edge. My boss attempted one last desperate bluff. "This is all taken out of context," he said, his voice wavering now. But there was no context that could save him. The emails weren't ambiguous. The recordings weren't distorted. The timeline wasn't disputed. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. He looked at me with something between anger and desperation. He realized finally that I had beaten him completely. Not with aggression, not with anger, but with patience, documentation, and truth. One executive said quietly, "We'll need to conduct a formal investigation. Nothing will move forward until we've reviewed everything thoroughly." He nodded, defeated. The fight had left him. HR and leadership formally confronted him with the full evidence. His lies unraveled in real time. I watched quietly, composed, from my desk as everything happened. His office door was closed, but everyone could see him in there, gesturing frantically, his voice raised. Then it went silent. He left the building within the hour. Later that day, an official announcement was sent. He was removed from client-facing oversight pending a formal investigation. The email didn't specify why. It didn't need to. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard the story by now. His attempts to redirect blame during the investigation failed completely. Each accusation was met with documented evidence. He had built his entire defense on lies, and lies cannot stand against a timeline of facts. Executives formally addressed his misconduct in a company meeting. They didn't share all the details publicly. They maintained professionalism. But they announced that he would be reassigned, effective immediately. "We've discovered serious inconsistencies in how project communications were handled," they said carefully. "Olivia has been completely exonerated and will be reassigned to a new project with full support." Colleagues quietly acknowledged my composure and integrity. People approached me to apologize for doubting me. Some offered support they should have offered months ago. Ryan mentioned that he had always thought something was off. Catherine squeezed my arm silently. The office felt a new equilibrium, one where truth had won, where justice had arrived not through shouting but through meticulous, intelligent strategy. I silently relished it. It was the cleanest victory I had ever experienced. I returned to my desk the next morning with a clear mind and a calm heart. No shouting. No public confrontation. No rage or vindication performed for an audience. Just truth and timing. Just patience and evidence. Leadership thanked me discreetly in a private meeting. "Your professionalism throughout this situation was extraordinary," they said. "We're committed to ensuring this doesn't happen again." The client relationship stabilized. I was assigned a new project with clear communication protocols and direct executive oversight. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee, reflecting on everything that had happened. Patience had won. Evidence had won. Silent strategy had won. Revenge had whispered, and now it had struck, not with violence or cruelty, but with irrefutable truth. The office was quiet again. The tension had dissipated. Colleagues treated me differently now, with respect, with deference even. But I didn't need their validation. I had validated myself through actions that proved who I was. Intelligent, composed, and capable of standing alone when standing alone was what integrity demanded. I was stronger now, professionally and emotionally. I had learned that the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's documented. And it's absolutely unstoppable.